Thank you indeed, Berta. That's a whistle-stop tour of what INR do and what they're about. And you gave us a great description following on from Lara's piece about what is racism in Ireland and all its manifestations. And the picture of the iceberg really explains a lot. But there were a couple of key things that I took away from that. One, that awareness is key, and that without all that awareness, we don't know enough to be able to make informed decisions. Also, you spoke about speaking to those with the lived experience of racism, and that from them you're learning all of the time, and that we have a responsibility, and that we have a responsibility also to be active anti-racists. I was interested very much too in the institutional racism that you mentioned around the Gardaí and the police, and also in schools. And in one way, that actually links us very nicely with the work of the Cork Migrant Centre. I had the privilege of working with Sister Jo McCarthy a number of years ago when she prepared a paper from the Cork Migrant Centre on the issue of racism in schools and how it's manifesting itself in schools. And it is often kind of an unconscious bias, and that children are experiencing things. And Joe and the Cork Migrant Centre were trying to bring this issue forward and presented the paper to the Convention of the Rights of the Child, and attended in Geneva to see their work through a number of years ago. So that's what you have mentioned there. There's a concrete example that is following on with the Cork Migrant Centre. And Sister Joe is here with us this evening. But on behalf of the Cork Migrant Centre, I'd like to welcome Naomi Masheti, who is the programme coordinator with the Cork Migrant Centre. So without further ado, I'll thank you, Berta. And again, I will say to people, if they want to put questions into the chat, feel free to do so. I see, I think Anne Kelleher from Manat has put a question in around speaking in schools. And I know from having been at the INR meeting that there are a number of people who attend there who do speak to schools and are open to invitation to attend schools, speaking specifically to young people on the issues that Berta has raised. So thanks, Anne, indeed, for that question. Naomi, if it's okay with you, I'm going to hand over to you, and thank you indeed for attending with us this evening. We're looking forward to hearing from you and a little bit more about the Cork Migrant Centre and what you do there. So I'll hand over to you. Thanks again, Naomi. You have the floor.
Thank you so much, Brian. If you can just put the first slide there. It was lovely listening to Lala and to Bata, and I think it really is a good segue to the work that we do, because Lala talked about why people leave and the difficult journeys for them to get where we are. I mean, to come to Ireland. And Bata talked a lot about the experiences of racism, particularly people of color. And at the Migrant Center, we have a psychosocial center. So it's kind of the first place of call, so to speak, when people come in. We have created a space, what we call a safe space. And it's not just a safe space, we call it a brave space. Because to be able to be vulnerable, to talk about your vulnerability and your experiences, that in itself is a strength. And so we create that space when people arrive and they can exhale and they can form networks and they can kind of begin to heal. And we work mainly with the people in the Direct Provision Center. So in our networks, we have a lot of activities for moms with babies and young people. And a lot of issues of racism come into play, and people helping each other, supporting each other, really a space of love, as Lala talked about. But today I'm going to present on the work of the young people, because we have done a lot of work on anti-racism in the schools. And really, even though this was coming to our doors, the first time we really consciously, strategically started responding to racism was after the killing of George Floyd. And what happened then is that the majority of the people that come to us, particularly the young ones and the moms, are of African origin. And we are very lucky in that there's a lot of, it's a migrant-led organizations. So there's a lot of us that look like the people that we work with. And I suppose that really gives them kind of an ability, a platform to establish relationships of trust. So when George Floyd was killed, there was that whole Black Lives Matter global consciousness of justice. And that obviously arrived at our shows. And I remember watching that and really starting, I was really identifying with it and really crying, and my children were crying. And then we were like, what are the people that are working with? What is their experiences? And we started talking to them, and it was everybody crying to each other. And we said, why don't we cry to people that need to hear, to see our tears and listen to us? And what that happened was that it was during COVID. So what we did, we organized an online webinar. If you go to the next slide. And so I can actually go over this because this is just the preference of racism, which is what Bata talked about. So I can easily go to the next slide. So after that, what happened is, Brian, you can go to the next slide. What happened is that after, Brian, I was saying you could go into the next slide. Yeah.
I'm moving this one.
Okay. Just okay. Go back. I'm confusing you. Just leave it there, and I can talk around it. It's fine. Yeah, it's fine. Yeah. So what happened really is that we kind of said we really needed to do something to tackle this racism. But before I get into that, I'll say in terms of the migrant center, I think I'm jumping a lot ahead of myself. Is that we after having the webinar in 2020, which was to address the policymakers, we kind of in tandem were doing a lot of activities in terms of supporting the people who are experiencing racism, be it supporting them in terms of the education pathways, employment pathways, and really giving them opportunities. And so that was part of their creating, helping them to create a sense of self-esteem. Can we get to the next one? And also, other than that, I think I lost my my slides.
Can you see that? Can you see that?
I can see it here, but I think I'm talking. Anyway, basically, let me I'll reorganize myself again. So in terms of the work that we do, in terms of responding and advocating for the people who come to our doors, is that we also feed into policy. And I think Brian talked a lot about one of the representation that was made by Sister Jo. And we're also looking at the curriculum to decolonize it because like Bata talked, it's about power. It's about, we say the curriculum that we have, it's really about marginalizing the knowledge of people from the global south and prioritizing the knowledge of the global north. And actually what that means is that part of tackling anti-racism is tackling the curriculum. And we're also looking at policies and procedures and saying, how can we advocate for that? We are advocating in the schools as well. We are advocating in terms of that structural institutional racism that Bata talked about. And we're also advocating to the general public because it is not just the frontline service providers or the policies. We also need everyday mom and dad and teacher and whoever you are, whatever your job is, to see that as your job and start tackling racism. So it's really tackling it from the grassroots and tackling it from the top as well. Next slide. So I will just walk you now, having talked about the general work, the work we do at a general level. I will walk through. I want to invite you to the Migrant Center and walk with us through our work. Next slide. So this is the webinar that I was talking about in 2020 after George Floyd. So we, as young people, it was a youth-led webinar. We had invited very high policymakers, the presidents of the primary schools, secondary schools, Cork Chamber of Commerce, like name it, like they were all there, head of the Gadi. And we actually had the young people really talk about their experiences to them so that they could have a sense of what they were going through. And we did not just stop at the webinar. We started doing a lot of work through like street art in terms of transformation of justice, where we are putting it out there, official signaling for people to see what is inside us. Next slide. So this was the webinar, and that's all the important people that were engaging. And it was really, the most important thing was that it was actually led by the young people talking to the policymakers directly and saying, this is our experience in schools. And we don't want to just be receiving, we don't want to be passive. We want to sit at the table, we want to be part of the change. Next slide. And like I said, after a lot of that, there was a lot of work that was happening. This was the streets of Cork outside the library. a lot of work talking about themselves, expressing themselves, putting it out there, and talking about what racism meant to them, what discrimination meant to them. And the most important thing about this, it was almost like catharsis. It was a way of really just expressing themselves and getting those feelings that they hadn't had an opportunity to talk about, get it out of their system. Next slide. And after the webinar, the really interesting thing is that the young people are now at the forefront, and they were asking for change. And we've seen how the global life movement was really led by young people. So what happened after the webinar is that they formed through subgroups. One of them was going to talk on to follow up on policy and follow up with the policy makers. And one of the things they asked the policy makers that were there is to choose one action that they could actually go and implement. And the people who are at the table were people at the top of their game, head of the organizations, who would actually make a difference and do something. And then another group decided they were going to start anti-racism training, because what was really coming out was that a lot of this racism by young people was in the schools. So there was a consensus that we really needed to do something in school. And we said, okay, some of the teachers are really well-meaning, but they're not equipped and they don't know what to do. So it's really pockets. So if we developed a training program from an experiential base of view, then that is something we could do and help in terms of helping to change the system. And then there was a sense that we needed a mentoring program because we are first generation migrants, and these young people have not seen a lot of other people who have positive examples. So we decided the people who have gone through the system are in college, they are working, they are doing well, are going to be mentoring, kind of provide representation for the young people. Next slide. And so that really went well, and a lot of that work started, as a result of which we actually got the first Cork Learning Cities Award because of the work that we did. And following on that, in 2023, we had the second summit, another youth-led summit, the first of its kind in Ireland, following the second one. And that was, they brought the same service providers, frontline policymakers they had invited in 2020. And they said, look, we told you about our experiences in 2020. We asked you to go and make some change now that we've seen the pain that we are going through. So 2023, we want you to come back and tell us, what have you done? And so some of them, like the Ombudsman for Children, had actually implemented anti-racist policy and in his organization. And so other people were like, yes, we are talking about it. And so not a lot of actions had been done, but at least the conversation was being had and people are talking about it. And then the following year, which was last year, we had yet another seminar, another webinar, still led by young people. And that was again to push on that change and see what is it that you're doing. And again, some of that, we saw some of the schools particularly had started to initiate some changes. But what was really interesting was that these young people had become so empowered. And because of that, they were actually in their own respective schools, they were initiating changes. They were talking to their teachers. They were saying, this is what we need to happen. And so we kind of said, seeing the impact of that conversation happening, and that was just last year. But in terms of, next slide, in terms of the next, so this is the webinar next year, we got a lot of attention from the media. And next slide, is that we could see also in terms of impact, the impact on the young people themselves, because they led the seminar, they talked to the politician, they could see part of the impact of the work that they were doing in terms of being at the table. And they had that self-confidence and self-esteem that racism really kills. And so we said, seeing them come alive and perform and really good impact in terms of that. Like, the work is still not there. We still don't have the policies that we need to see. We are still pushing, but at least we can see kind of a positive impact on the ground. Next slide. And apart from the seminars, there are other things that we'll be doing along the line. And a lot of that is really, so in terms of migrants in Ireland, even when you hear the far right talk about it, it's always from a very negative point of view, a very deficit lens. Like migrants are takers, they are passives, they don't contribute to society. And no matter what we do, no matter you are running, like you are running 400 meters, no matter you've won the Rose of Tralee, no matter you've won, they still don't, you're still not allowed to enjoy that win. So a lot of what we are doing is to really nurture a sense of confidence. So we have this series called Remarkable. And what we do is that we get young people and we bring other young people that have really achieved, and they have conversations with them. And we're trying to say, look, people may not think you're all that, but you are remarkable in your own way. And these have also been, we've seen a lot of positive impact coming from these remarks, particularly during Frederick Douglass event. We had a lot of talks with Paul and Nikhil. They work for Hamilton, the musical, which is like a huge thing. So to have someone like Paul identify with the kids and talk with them on Remarkable series have been really inspirational and brought a lot of positive impact. Next slide. And again, like I said, a lot of work on decolonizing the curriculum. So I also work in the local university. I do a lot of seminars. We do a lot of work on this topic. And what we are trying to say is that really, when you look at your curriculum, you don't see much about Africa. You don't see anything about Asia. We don't see who has contributed to knowledge in that. In the curriculum, we don't even see textbooks by African authors. We don't see Black teachers in the schools. And so you can't see what you can't be. And it's really talking about how do we bring about that representation to bring that center into the knowledge, because school is a place where children get a sense of identity, they get a knowledge, they get to see the world. And so that's really important for them. And so that work is really continuing and it's very close to us. Next slide. And so just a snapshot of kind of the impact that our work has had, even just looking at 2024. So we've had about 40 homework sessions, because we do that as well to support them, particularly people in the direct provision centers who have no access, free access to third level education and have to depend on scholarships. So we do the homework clubs to support them to get the points to get the scholarship. And then we have mentors who work with them to support them in career guidance, and also the moms, because the parents don't understand the Irish education system. We have workshops with Apple who support us, and that has happened. In terms of the kids in the DP centers, we've had about 400 workshops with them this year. The young people who do a lot of their work in performance and visual arts, we had about 26 live performances in Cork. And that really gives them a sense of pride. You can imagine performing in front of a whole crowd is a lot of confidence. And again, very popular on social media because of that, which is really good for them as young people. And next slide is, I think that's it for me. And in terms of like the anti-racist summits as well, like I said, we have had impacts like the anti-racist policy by the ombudsman's children, and we've had a lot of trainings in the school. And I think that's kind of the end of my slides, unless you have something else to say. But I wanted to say, if you can just put the last one, Brian, is to say that I wanted to add with hope, because it's a very nice slide of people very happy, jumping. So really hopeful, but it doesn't have to be.
This one.
It doesn't have to be, Brian, it's fine.
Hold on now.
Yeah.
Is that it?
No, the very last one. Yeah, that's the very last one. So like you, the webinar is on hope. So despite the experiences of racism, we still have very happy children. That's the T-shirt. You can't see him properly, but that's them dancing with the t-shirt. So they are very happy. They are very confident in themselves. They are performing in City Hall. So it's been a great journey. It's a story of vulnerability, but a story of hope.
Yeah, super, super. Naomi, thank you so much indeed. You told the story with such passion. It's just wonderful. And all those highlights at the end. And what I really like is that the Taoiseach is dancing, but we're not looking at him. We can't even see him. We know he's
Yeah.
doing it. We also know he's a rubbish dancer. But the fact that this has been led by the young people. And halfway through, I was thinking, of course, it'd be great if they did some art. And of course, then you said, and then they got into the art. The colour is just fabulous. It's just super. And the whole fact that you are calling the guys to account in 1 year, saying, now we're telling you what the problem is in 2020. 2023, we want you to come back and we will mark your homework. 2024, it's a case of, sorry, what did you say you do that you haven't done again? So it's just super. And the fact that they are out there doing their thing. And I thought that your work very much sounds a little bit like the passion and the heart that's in your work sounds like the passion that Lara mentioned earlier when you talked about the brave space, allowing somebody to be vulnerable in that space, a place where people find love, that space of love. There is a huge correlation. Somehow we have to get Mary Williams and yourselves together so that you can see what you're. Maybe that's already happening. There is so much that's going on, and the work in the schools is just phenomenal. And actually, that's what I was talking about when I said Joe went to Geneva to speak to that work and to comment on how this is happening in schools. And then you mentioned then the work that you're doing in direct provision centres around trying to make sure that children are getting their homework to build up points to get into colleges. And some of that then goes to the next speaker that we have, and our final speaker, who is Brother Kevin Mascarenas. So, Naomi, I'll just thank you and I'll invite people then. And there's a lot of comments, you can read them there. There's a lot of very fine comments about your work and the work of the Migrant Centre in Cork. And we will come back to some questions at the end. But for the moment, Dr. Naomi Masheti, thank you so much indeed for all that you've done in preparing for us this evening. And I'm going to ask Brother Kevin Mascarenas, who is a member of the Africa Europe Faith and Justice Network, to speak to the Schools of Sanctuary. Brother Kevin has been a long time involved in the Schools of Sanctuary, and I would say he's more Cork than Dublin, even though he's living in Dublin now. So he'd be well known to Joe and Naomi and the Cork Migrant Centre. Indeed, they worked hand in hand in lots of projects over the years, so they are very well known to each other. And Kevin works as a presentation brother in lots of other areas. He's also part of APT, Act to Prevent Trafficking, and indeed some of what we're hearing tonight around safe passage for migrants and the vulnerability of people falling into the hands of smugglers, or the fact that the unsafe passage creates greater vulnerabilities for those who are trafficked. And Lara mentioned the triple trauma. Naomi commented on the trauma people are suffering and how their work is trying to get it out, or trying to empower people, which is what Berta said needs to happen. So I'm going to invite Kevin. Kevin, if you don't mind, you might come in and we'll allow you to speak then to the Schools of Sanctuary, which we're looking forward to. You're the last speaker.